There's been a lot of debate about how good the BYU football program is amidst their 5-0 start, being ranked 17th in the country. Well, we figured we'd get some numbers on that. We're going to talk with the Pro Football Focus analyst exactly how good BYU actually is. It's all ahead on today's show.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars your first view or listen of the day. And, of course, a big thank you to all of you who like to call everydayers right here on your original daily podcast focused on the BYU Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Get started with $200 in bonus bets with your first $5 bet. It's all courtesy of your friends over at FanDuel. Go to FanDuel.com to get started today. All right, please welcome in now Dalton Wasserman from Pro Football Focus. He's an analyst over there, also hosts their college football show. And Dalton, I want to start off with this. I mentioned in the open, there's been a lot of debate here in Provo and Utah in general about how good BYU actually is amidst this 5-0 start. What's your perception from the outside of how good the Cougars actually are?
I think they're definitely better than last year, right? You get off to this 5-0 start, and it's as many games as you won all of last year. It's very obvious they are better. We'll find out how much better, especially with next week's game against Arizona, who's also very good. They've got an elite quarterback, an elite receiver in Tetero McMillan, and a solid secondary. So you're going to find out more about how good, because I think we have to remember, too, BYU did start 4-1 last year and then lost 6 of their final 7 games. So I do think they're better, though. I think Jake Retzlaff, we've seen a lot of improvement from him at quarterback, after kind of a rocky, 4 starts he made last year. And then their defense all the way around. I can't say there's necessarily one star player. There's a lot of guys on their defense playing better. I think that's a huge key for them. It's just giving up less points than they did last year. They look more fundamentally sound on defense. So I do think they're better, and we'll find out how much better soon.
Now, last week against Baylor, Jake Retzlaff notched a really, really high grade according to PFF stats. I think it was 84 plus, if I recall correctly, off the top of my head. And he looked at the peak of his powers in the first half of that game in particular. But the second half, a couple of interceptions, had some drops from his wide receivers. And I think there were some out there saying, well, how could his grade be that good? The nice part about how PFF goes about things, you can lend insight into this, is they look at literally every single play, grade exactly what went good, what went bad, and that ultimately it kind of averages out. I think the indication, if he has an 84 grade in a performance like that, indicates that he's still on his way up.
Yeah, absolutely. Actually, I've got his overall grade here in that game as an 89.6,
okay.
Which I'm pretty sure that's the best grade of his career. I don't believe any of his games are anywhere near that last year. So no, definitely made big throws when he had to, especially early. Still, sometimes he gets a little loose with the football, especially under pressure. And I think 6 of his 7 turnover-worthy plays this year are against the blitz. So that's kind of the one thing where you're seeing teams starting to turn up the heat on him. But when he's clean and against a standard rush and he has time back there in the pocket, he's made really good throws this year. And one of the things, even in last year's tape, that I noticed is a really nice ability to throw the ball down the middle of the field. And that's something that a lot of offensive coordinators stress a lot. I think it's a big part of this BYU offense that he attacks the middle of the field. He's got a really good arm, a lot of velocity, and he's certainly not afraid to throw it into tight windows. Sometimes it bites him here and there, but he's not afraid at all to throw it into tight windows. And I have to credit, too, their offensive coordinator, Roderick. I was just watching some more of the tape today. He's done a nice job of making a lot of easier throws, like easy read throws for Retzlaff, where it's, cutting the field in half, get him in a rhythm early with some screens, do all the things to get him in a rhythm, and then he gets into the game and we can start making some of those vertical throws. I think we've seen it was good to see him get off to a better start against Baylor, but I think Roderick and him are working very, very well in sync right now.
Now, you mentioned the defense, and you feel there's all kinds of contributions across the board. And this is a defense last year. If you look at all the metrics, they were sub 100. It felt like across the board in terms of their overall metrics. Give me, and I guess our fan base a sense of where you think they maybe have been the best this season in terms of the overall defensive output.
I think the most tangible thing, let's say first, that their defense across the board in just about every department has been better. They're manufacturing a pass rush, even though they may not have one star pass rusher, let's say like some of the superstars we have in college football. But across the board, they're playing better. They've got a bunch of guys grading in the 70s for us. It's a very well-rounded effort. But for me, with the teams they've played so far, especially that K-State game, their run defense has been very, very good. I believe I saw they were 19th in the country in run defense grade for us. And I have to give credit especially to their 2 main linebackers, Harrison Taggart and Jack Kelly. those two guys were guys I was looking at, especially in that K-State game of like, okay, these are the two guys that have to step up. And they really have. They've been really good at linebacker. You can see it affecting their whole front seven. And they're just playing it's really good, fundamentally sound team football. There's not a single player on this defense grading above an 80 for us. There's not anybody in the 80s, but they have so many guys that are just playing fundamentally sound, good team football that's what it's been. It's a true team effort on their defense.
Now you talk about all these guys grading out in the 70s, and some people would be thinking, well, that's a C grade if you were in school. Can you elaborate on what a 70, like in the 70s, means for you guys at PFF?
So if you have guys in the 70s, you're talking about like solid starter, like if that makes sense, right? So if I'm looking at BYU's defensive page right now, and they have 11 guys grading in the 70s across various positions, that's 11. And even if you're getting into the high 60s, like 67 and above, you're talking about starting caliber players. It's not like a C minus thing. Like if you're getting into our scale and you're talking about, oh, this guy's like a C minus, it's closer to like a 60, right? Or in the high 50s, right? Whereas in the 70s is like a good player, and you get up into the 80s and up into the 90s, then you get into like great players and All-Americans and elite type of guys up towards 90. But you have that many guys playing like good, well-rounded football. Again, I count 11 guys here in the 70s. So, I mean, there's your defense, 11 solid starters, right? And a bunch of other guys. I actually only have I only have a handful of defensive players for them, even below 60. And that's really actually the benchmark between should you really be on the field more or less. So it's just a really good, well-rounded effort they've got going.
Now, one more question on the offensive, flipping back to the offense for a moment here. Obviously, they've had a kind of a revolving door of running backs here, and a lot of it's gone on Jake Retzlaff to have the success that BYU's had offensively. Can you give us a sense? You mentioned the fact that across the board, BYU's defense is very solid. Offensively, what do the grades look like in terms of the overall offense?
It's a little bit better in the passing game for sure. You've got Retzlaff as their highest graded player right now. You've got Chase Roberts and Darius Lassiter, who are solid at receiver, and even their offensive line, their pass protection is well ahead of their run blocking. So it's a team that definitely leans towards the passing game, right? And that's the side that's getting them through right now. And there can be some improvements made in their run game, and you'd like to see them be more well-rounded. I think it's part of why Baylor was able to come back and make that a game last week, is because BYU doesn't quite have the run game all the way firing on all cylinders yet. They're trying to figure out who is that running back that can really be the horse. Jake Retzlaff's the only guy with 100 rushing yards, at least if you take out sacks, on the season for us right now. So it's one of those things where I'd like to see them be more well-rounded on offense. But the passing game has enough weapons and enough pass protection, and Retzlaff's playing well enough where that's really the feature of this team right now.
All right, I want to ask you about some improvements. You talk about the running game need to be an improvement. We'll talk about that momentarily as you roll on right here on Locked On Cougars. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys no matter what you're into when it comes to your sports betting needs, whether you're into the NFL, college football we've been talking about, your basketball hoop head that's coming up with the NBA and college basketball seasons, Major League Baseball with the postseason. Best part is FanDuel's got all the options for you guys because they are America's #1 sports book. Right now, when you get the hunch in the middle of a game right now, you can check out the stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets with our friends at FanDuel. And of course, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. Simple as that. $200 bonus bets guaranteed, $5 bet. It's really that simple. Go to FanDuel.com to learn more now. That's FanDuel.com, and that's, of course, courtesy of your friends over at FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. If you have not done so already, check out the Locked On College Football Podcast. It's a great way to get caught up on all the college football news out there. And also, I would encourage you guys to check out what Dalton's got going on with Pro Football Focus. As I'm not mistaken, Dalton, you're the co-host of the Pro Football Focus college football show as well. Is that correct?
Yeah, Max Chadwick and myself, every Sunday and Tuesday, we review and preview all of the best games in college football. I think we're certain to do the BYU Arizona game next week. So tune into that Tuesday night at 6:00 Eastern. Reviews, previews. We actually just did a mock draft earlier today. That'll come up. I forget what day it's coming up, but that's coming up soon. And just all talking everything college football. Just the games are getting bigger, man. I can't wait, especially for next week. This October 12th slate is going to be a lot of fun.
Yeah, we've had Max on the show a few times. He's a fan favorite every time he's come on. I'm sure people are going to love your stuff as well. And the nice part is you've got a lot of insight, as obviously with the numbers that back up a lot of what we're talking about here. Now, I mentioned the fact that I wanted to talk about where BYU can improve. Obviously, the running game. You mentioned the fact that Jake Retzlaff's the only running back right now over 100 yards on the season. how important is it for BYU, whether it's LJ Martin coming back from injury or whoever else in that running back stable, that they get somebody in there and get that running game stabilized?
Extremely important. I think you don't want to put too much pressure on Jake Retzlaff, who's a guy who doesn't have a ton of experience, right, at the FBS level as a former JUCO player. You don't want to put too much pressure on him to carry you, and I think any offense is better with balance. We talk about it with so many teams, even within the Big 12, talk about it with a Colorado or an Arizona or a Utah, the other way around, who's trying to figure out the quarterback situation right now. Any offense with balance is a better offense, right? And I think that's a part where you don't want to be like, I think the Baylor game is a great example, right? You're up so big in that game. And I just watching the offensive tape when they had the big lead, they still had to throw the ball. And even if it was throwing shorter and doing screens and things like that, they just struggled to run between the tackles and get first downs and milk the clock, right? So there is a part where you do have to balance it out. It's a lot of pressure on a quarterback when everyone knows he's throwing, and it gets a lot harder, and teams figure out coverages, and they've been blitzing Retzlaff a lot. And I think it's just the thing. If they have balance, if they can get behind this offensive line and just pick up more first downs running the ball, I'm not saying they're going to lead the nation in rushing by any means, but to have that balance is big, especially when so many teams in the Big 12 can run the ball well.
Now, the offensive line's a big part of this. And Connor Pay, their star center, is out for at least 6 weeks. It sounds like he came on our podcast. So he had a Jones fracture. He had surgery on that. So obviously have to reshuffle the interior of that offensive line. But looking at the grades from Pro Football Focus, their tackles, mainly Caleb Etienne, have been a revelation this season. So can you give us a sense of, without Connor Pay, what do you think they need to do in terms of the offensive line to get that going?
Look, it's just about playing fundamentally sound football. And I think the one good thing for BYU's run schemes, now they've added in a little more quarterback run and quarterback power and things like that. But for the most part, what we know BYU as is one of those outside zone teams. I always go back to watching them even under Aaron Roderick with Zach Wilson. But when they had Tyler Algier, it was outside zone. It was Tyler Algier. It was very basic, but it worked. And they could they could pop off 5-6 yards of carry anytime. Look, I'm not saying they're going to be super explosive, but even without your starting center, you have to go in there and just play fundamentally sound football. Because right now, that's the one thing that worries me. Pretty much all of their metrics across the board, rushing and run blocking, are below average at the Power 5 level. So they just need more yards before contact, more yards after contact for the backs. It really needs to just be a better group effort there. Look, and you're right, it doesn't help not to have Connor Pay in there, absolutely. But it's about the unit coming together, and it just enough. Again, just enough. And I think the addition of Retzlaff's legs as a threat really does help that. I think anytime you have a mobile quarterback who can hold backside defenders, or that you can run a design quarterback run and change the numbers game up front, that helps too. So they just have to find the right schemes and play just a little more fundamentally sound in the run game.
Okay, going back to what you said about the defense, obviously the grades across the board, very solid. But do you feel like down the stretch of the season, so obviously they've gone through 5 games, they got 7 regular season games to go. Does BYU need to have a defender or two really kind of emerge and, as you mentioned, kind of become a star player here, where maybe they boost their ratings into the 80s and really stand out?
Yeah, for me, it would be in their pass rush, because I think they create a lot of pass rush with different stunts and simulated pressures and stuff like that. But you really want one of those dynamic pass rushers to come up for you. And Tyler Batty's having a good year. He's got 15 pressures. Jack Kelly causes a lot of problems as a blitzer. But what we're trying to find that one pass rusher. They have 9 sacks on the year, for at least by our numbers. I know ours sometimes are a little weird, but we have 9 sacks on the year and only 4 of them by defensive linemen. So at a certain point, when you're playing really good passing games, let's say like Arizona coming up next, and Noah Fafita's a problem, Tetero McMillan's a problem, you need to really exhaust all your resources to cover McMillan and a really good Arizona passing game. If they can get that one star pass rusher, whoever that might be, that's kind of something they don't have right now up front on their D-line. Can they make things happen with 4? And can they make things happen against better pass protecting offensive lines? Because even the Kansas State game, I think it's pretty proven at least right now. Avery Johnson is so young. He's not a drop back passer like that. You get ahead of him, he's very uncomfortable. They made him uncomfortable. But at a certain point, you need to be able to send 4 and win the battle. If they can find a big time pass rusher, I think that helps.
Now, Batty is a guy, you figure Tyler Batty, 15 pressures. He feels like he's a step away constantly. I watch every one of these games. I rewatch them for film analysis, and it just feels like he's like, we're talking inches away from those big plays. I guess, is there some way you feel like he could get unlocked where he could become that star pass rusher? Do you see something in the numbers that maybe indicates that?
Honestly, a big thing really is just you just have to keep at it. When you're a pressure machine, but you're not finishing the sacks, it's a thing where you really have to just keep at it, right? And he could win a little more often. I've got just under a 12% pass rush win rate right now, which is decent. But if you got that up closer to 15 to 17, now you'd really be talking about a guy who's getting to be a big time pass rusher. So yeah, win a little more often, win a little bit quicker, but pressure eventually leads to sacks, and that's why we're so big on pressures and pass rush grade. The two of those things give you the barometer of how often you're getting to a quarterback, at least disrupting him. And the pass rush grade, a big part of that is the quality of your wins. So winning more often, winning a little bit quicker, and I think that second part is going to be the part where now you start seeing more sacks, right? I mean, also, and look, it feels like every college team has a mobile quarterback now, too. There's very few teams with those statue quarterbacks. So it is tough to finish those plays, but the fact that, look, they have 3 different players with 15 pressures so far this season, which is solid. They just need to finish plays and maybe win a little bit quicker, and they'll start getting there. They just have to keep applying that.
Now, you talk about Arizona and that vaunted passing attack. Tedero McMillan, you mentioned, he's just absolutely lights out. In terms of what BYU needs to do on the pass defense, I think a lot of Cougar fans watch Baylor really attack BYU through the air because they just couldn't get anything going on the ground. But they still did go for over 300 yards passing. And I would say that Sawyer Robertson and Noah Fafita are on 2 very different levels as a quarterback. What about BYU's pass defense? What needs to change there, in your opinion?
I just, I don't think they're playing necessarily too bad. It's just I think again the pass rush would help it, right? I think it's kind of a similar thing to me. It's a good team effort. They have solid players across the board, but who's my lights out guy, or who's the safety that's really going to start reading the football and getting to it? And we got some turnovers in the Baylor game, which was big time, especially to end the game, right? I need that a little more often. It's kind of that thing. They're playing sound football. Now I need to start making plays on the ball, right? And it's kind of that thing. It's their entire defense is kind of the same across the board. They're playing sound football for sure. They're playing good enough winning football. When do we start making game-changing plays? Because that was the fun part in the Kansas State game where we got game-changing plays. We got interceptions. We've got a scoop and score, right? Then obviously the special teams touchdown. It's about creating turnovers and making the big plays as opposed to just being, sound and efficient, which is great. But in a game like this against Arizona, just being good enough might not work for you. You got to force some turnovers. So I think they've done that the last 2 weeks, and that's really those plays on the ball need to keep coming from their secondary.
I know this might be off the beaten path, but we've not talked about special teams. And actually, it's been a weapon for BYU this year. A fake punt last week against Baylor. The week before that, a fantastic punt return that almost turned into a disaster before it turned into what it was. And then also a kick return 2 weeks before that for a touchdown. How much can special teams help BYU down the stretch here?
It's a huge deal. And down coaching, I used to coach high school football in Florida, and for a while I coached special teams, and I absolutely loved it. Look, it makes such a big difference because, in football, it's hard for even with all of our information to quantify momentum. Yeah. But a kick return touchdown, a fake punt that your punter goes for 20 yards, the punt return touchdown that you mentioned, it's momentum. It's all of a sudden it's turning the game around. It's flipping it upside down, and all of a sudden you have a lead. Because honestly, especially that punt return against K-State, once that happened, the game was over. Yeah. That was the end of the game right there. We didn't need to see the rest of it because the momentum was just so far on BYU's side. It is massive. Look, teams that are good on special teams win more football games, and we're even we're behind the scenes. We're always trying to find more ways, and coaches are always trying to find more ways where it's like, how can we quantify this and make sure that we're doing this the right way? Because they're game-changing plays. Even things like punting and kicking off and kicking field goals. How many teams a week do we see missing field goals and losing ball games, or a shank punt loses a ball game? If this is a thing that BYU prides itself on and they can rely on all season at this level, it's going to make a huge difference because there are teams out there that don't play good special teams, and those are the teams that in big moments in the biggest games, you find that out. If you have a punt returner that's muffing it all the time, or if you have a field goal kicker you can't trust, these things matter. So the fact, the Kansas State game on our show with Max, I told him, I said, this was as good as a 3-phase beatdown as you will see all season because they did it. They did it on offense, on defense, and on special teams. So it really exemplifies the team effort that BYU is playing with right now, despite not having really any of the household names that we think of throughout college football.
All right. So, Dalton, I know that in addition to what you do with obviously the metrics in terms of PFF, you also cover NFL draft. And I want to talk to you about maybe some of the names that BYU fans should pay attention to in terms of potential draft interest. And we'll get to that momentarily right here on Locked On Cougars. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view and or listen of the day. I do want to remind you guys that Dalton joins us, courtesy of Pro Football Focus. And Pro Football Focus has got you covered all season long with the best data, tools, and analysis in the game. Sign up for PFF Plus today to unlock all the famous player grades and premium stats. I can tell you it's an absolute goldmine if you want to understand football at a deeper level. I can speak from that from personal experience. Push to the playoffs in your fantasy league with in-season tools and award-winning rankings from the fantasy expert Nathan Jonke, and as well as staying connected to the next generation of talent and best NFL draft coverage on the planet. No matter what you're looking for, Pro Football Focus Plus is what you need to make winning decisions all season long. Sign up for PFF Plus today for less than $10 a month. All right, Dalton, before we go on today's show, you are a draft analyst in addition to your work as a data analyst for PFF. Is there a name or two out there that stands out above the rest in terms of BYU's draft hopefuls for this upcoming draft class?
I mean, honestly, I look at two guys with some prototypical frames when you look at offensively and defensively. I'll start on offense at receiver with Chase Roberts. You got a guy who's 6'4" and 210. That always stands out, and he's a vertical threat. And he's caught 13 of his 15 passes beyond 10 air yards down the field. You got a guy who's 6'4" and who's a vertical threat and fast like that. He's always going to get a chance at the NFL. There's more teams looking for more receivers than ever. I think Chase Roberts is a guy you're going to see looked at. And I think Tyler Batty, look, and I know so far – pass rush grade in the 70s. We haven't quite, been so explosive as a pass rusher, but 6'5", 275. He's their highest graded defensive player right now. That's another guy. You got a body like that, and if you start producing, look, these are positions at receiver and at defensive end especially where you talk about teams look for prototypes. They look for big frames. They look for athletic guys who they can mold into something that's, even better than what they are now. So I do think these are a couple guys that will get NFL looks for sure. And we could see, again, it's funny with this BYU team, they're well-rounded, but who's going to emerge? If they're going to have a special season here, there's going to be 2 or 3 guys that emerge as stars. I think it could be those guys, and maybe somebody will surprise us too.
Well, now I wanted to ask you about 2 other guys from my end. One's offense, one's defense. One is Caleb Etienne. He moved from right tackle to left tackle this year, and he's been a revelation, quite honestly, because he was unplayable, borderline unplayable at points last year, but he's been really, really solid this year at left tackle. And BYU, funny enough, their last 3 left tackles, you go to Brady Christensen, you go to Blake Freeland, you go to Kingsley Suamataia, all of them drafted in the NFL draft. What are the chances that Caleb, even with the 1 year of standing out here at left tackle, could he make it 4 for 4 for BYU?
Same idea. Look at 6'8" and 320. They're gonna know who he is. They're gonna find out who he is, and they're gonna take a long, hard look at him, like you mentioned, because BYU does have a long history of excellent offensive linemen. Right? He's through 5 games. He's only given up 4 pressures, and he's got an 87.5 pass blocking grade. I don't know the exact rank, but I can tell you it's darn near the top of the country with that number. So you got a guy at left tackle who can pass protect from a school with a long history of great offensive linemen. That plays, and especially at 6'8" and 320, just like Kingsley, just like those other guys you mentioned, somebody's going to take him and be like, look, this guy's a monster. He's got all the potential in the world, and it's good to see him going out there, at least in the passing game right now, and proving that.
He's got physical tools to work with. That's what NFL teams obviously look for. Now on defense, Jack Kelly. He came up from Weber State. I think all of us looked at what he offered at the FCS level playing for Weber and said, wow, this kid has an impact all over the field. And the question was, would it translate to the Power 4 level? And so far, it's actually translated fairly well. He maybe doesn't have, as you mentioned, maybe the physical tools, but I want your insight. Is he a guy who is a viable NFL draft prospect at this point?
I think he could be a late-round pick. I think what you have, and I was watching him a little bit early, you have a guy that likes to trigger downhill, all right? And I think he was a huge part of their success against Kansas State. Maybe not the most flashy statistical day, but you see how he reads the offensive line, and BYU has all their linebackers reading the offensive line well. He likes to trigger downhill, and they've been sending him as a blitzer like crazy. He's got 15 pressures and 3 sacks this year. So there is a role for him for sure, because you see him play with his hair on fire. He reads the offensive line. He likes to hit people. Clearly, there's definitely some questions in coverage, up at 240 pounds. But I think you have a guy who I think as a role player in the NFL could get a shot, right? Role player, special teams kind of guy, maybe a base linebacker where he plays more so on rundowns or as a blitzer. and there's a spot I still think on every team for that sort of guy, right? I think even take an example like the Chiefs, the Kansas City Chiefs, with a guy like Leo Chenal, who was really known more as a run defender coming out of college. Now he's worked his way into a little more of a star role, but there's a role like that for guys. I think about it as Azeez Al-Shire, who's bounced around as a really good run defender around the league. Those guys can play. So he just has to continue to prove he can read offensive lines. He can get downhill and hit people. And I think his work as a blitzer, as a pass rusher, really helps him. I think, even in a special teams type of role, those are the types of things. I think his football character, at least from what you see on tape, really help his case.
Well, I think you mentioned the Kansas City Chiefs. That makes every Cougar fan sit up because Andy Reid obviously is a famous BYU alum, and as the head coach of the Chiefs, he's made no bones about it. If he sees a guy at BYU he likes and he has a chance to get him, he will go out and grab them, and that could be the opportunity for a guy like Jack Kelly, because we're seeing it every year, it feels like. They took Kingsley in the second round last year, and I know he's had his struggles early on, and I also wanted to ask you about that real quick. Rookie offensive lineman getting day one starts at left tackle. How did Kingsley grade out, and what's the future for him in your opinion?
I think he does need some work for sure. I got to check his updated grades real quick, but he needs some work. And there was some thought that he was going to need some work early in his career, that maybe he could sit for a bit and just he would have to go through it a little bit. But no, I mean, it's been tough for him. And now Wanye Morris, I think, is he back in there in the most recent game at left tackle? It has been tough. It's a big jump in competition, obviously, and that's a lot of left tackle for the Kansas City Chiefs is a whole lot of pressure. Kingsley, another one, kind of like these other guys we've talked about. He's got all the tools in the world. Absolutely does. He absolutely has all the tools. I think we're going to be talking about about actually Caleb Etienne the same way we talked about Kingsley, where we're like, man, you give this guy some time and you can mold him, he's going to be really good. So I do think Kingsley, it's going to take some time. He's struggled so far, but it's one of those things where the Chiefs look, they're going to develop them. And, Andy Reid loves developing offensive linemen. He's done it with mid-round picks, late-round picks, early round. It doesn't matter. He's going to find a way to make this guy useful. And I think we kind of knew some of the bumps were coming early for him just because he's got to work on some technique things.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, Dalton, is there anything else Cougar fans should know from your side of things about their football program, or anything else you'd like to pass along?
I'll tell you, I just think next week's going to be a whole lot of fun. That's going to be a fun one with Arizona. I can't wait. There's so many games next Saturday, October 12th. Yeah. This week, we're kind of getting through it a little bit. It's a lighter slate, still some good games, but it's definitely on that big October 12th list of primetime games. I can't wait to see BYU against Arizona, especially Arizona getting that huge win at Utah. They kind of switched up their offensive play callers. They're playing a little better. Their last game, BYU's off to a great start. I can't wait to see some of these Big 12 games where they're kind of the barometer games. I think Colorado had one against UCF last week where it's like, okay, that's kind of real. This is the game where we find out both of these teams with BYU and Arizona where they're real. So I'm as excited for it as you are, honestly.
All right. Well, Dalton, I appreciate you taking some time, and hopefully this will not be the last time we have you on the show. All right.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me on, Jake.
All right, that is Dalton Wasserman from Pro Football Focus. Make sure you check out Pro Football Focus Plus if you want all the intel on all things football, really, NFL, college, or otherwise. But as always, a big thank you to him for taking the time, and as a big thank you to all of you once again for making Locked On Cougars your first view or listen of the day. And as always, thank you for being everydayers with us right here on the Locked On Cougars podcast.